so fascinating about the story of the Passion is that the crucifixion is not the end of the story. The end of the story is the resurrection. And so the implication there is the same as the implication of going into the abyss to rescue your father from the belly of the beast. It's like the tragedy isn't the end of the story, the resurrection is the end of the story. And so then you wonder what that means psychologically, because what you see in psychotherapeutic session, in the psychotherapeutic milieu, is that if you get people to expose themselves to what they're terrified of, being terrified isn't the end of the story. Recovering is the end of the story. And so that begs the question is like, well, to what degree are we capable of bearing suffering and prevailing? And the answer might be to the degree that we're capable of confronting it forthrightly. And that might actually just be true. And you think, well, how could it be otherwise in some sense? Like, what's going to call the best out of you if it isn't what's most challenging? Because it's not that easy to get the best called out of you. It's not going to just happen because someone rings your doorbell, right? You have to be shook to the core before you're going to undertake what's necessary to make the sacrifices that are required to put you in alignment. That doesn't happen with no reason. So are you grateful for your suffering as a consequence of that? I don't know. That's a high standard, man. That's a high standard, and maybe it's unrealistic. But
I think one of the things that faith brings us to is, and we were talking about it when we were in the chapel in the friary, is that when we look at the cross, and it's very Catholic, is that we always see Jesus there, that the corpus is there. And because you talk about in your chapter about what does it look like to transcend suffering, and what does that individual look like? And in some ways our businesses are similar, right? People are bringing their brokenness to you and they bring their brokenness to me. But I believe in a God that can transform that. So I was asking myself, well, what does that look like? And I recall a priest that I met in Africa, and I believe what he had was Lou Gehrig's disease. So by the time I met him, he was no longer able to really move his arms or legs very well. And we were praying that the Lord would heal him in that. And then he began to share his story with me and what had taken place in he and his community in the midst of his sickness, in the midst of his suffering. Was he said, people didn't used to go to church very much, but since I've been sick, people are coming. And that they wouldn't line up for confessions, but since I've been sick, there's a long line of people coming to confession. He said the church was half full and now it's packed. He said people begin to speak and they say that I'm more empathetic, that I'm more compassionate, that I'm more loving, that I'm more kind. And I'm embarrassed to admit that at that moment, as he was sharing his story about the transformation that was taken both in he and in the community, I was praying, Lord, please don't heal him. Because if we believe that this is what I want to be, right? I want to be loving, and I want to be kind, and I want to be generous, and I want to be empathetic. But I don't want it to be through the cross. There's got to be another way that we can discover that. So wouldn't it though, right? But the fundamental key to the central Christian reality is it's through that cross that we are transformed. It's by, one of the things I was reflecting on, Jesus embraces his cross, his suffering, and says yes to that, a yes which I just can't imagine.
And Mary says yes to it too.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Because she offers her
That's the
son
question
to
that I want to talk about, is which is more difficult for he does.
Hey, good question.
Thank you.
I'd rather not
Just a
do
second.
either.
Good question. Thank you very much. I think we're done. Thank you for coming. Right? But isn't that in fact the case? Is that when Jesus embraced his suffering, he gives life to the world. He breaks the power over this evil one, over the snake, and gives life. Suffering is no longer meaningless. Actually, it's salvific. But the same thing happened with this priest in this community in Nairobi, Africa, is that he embraced the suffering, and it transformed him, yes, but it also transformed the community around him because they saw the way and the manner with which he suffered. And he embraced that, and he found that to be transformative. Isn't that what it means when you talk about transcending this? And you talk about how the impact that can have on another person watching. That's what the invitation, that's what the gospel is inviting us to.
Yeah, that seems right to me.
Okay, so how do you reconcile this? Thank you. Another point.
Reconcile them in what sense?
So you tell the story, and you tell the story beautifully of the Passion and the resurrection, but how do you personally approach that? How do you reconcile this reality?
I think that's what you try to do in your life. You know, I mean, this is an idea that I derived, I would say, in large part from reading Jung, Carl Jung. He talked about, psychologically again, about the two great ideas about Christ. You know, there's the idea in John, and that Christ is the Word that was there at the beginning of time and at the end of time. It's this temporally eternal divine Word, impersonal in some sense almost.
What do you mean by that?
Well, because it's something that extends from the beginning of time to the end of time isn't so evidently human, you know? It's elevated beyond the confines of what's merely human. But it lacks something as a consequence of that too, right? It lacks time and place. Yeah. And the way Christianity...
The nature of the incarnation. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It bridges that gap. I had a student once who asked me, why don't we just tell the same archetypal story over and over? Why do we need all these variations? And I thought, that's a really good question. I'm not exactly sure about that. And then I thought, oh, it's related to this issue, is that there's the divine Word, but there's the incarnation, and the incarnation indicates that the specifics of time and place are just as important as the eternal that surrounds it. And so then I would say, well, that's probably true in each of our lives, is that, well, how do we reconcile this? And well, that's your ethical adventure, how you reconcile that. And we each do it in our own way and with tremendous difficulty, I would say, and we do it aided and abetted if we're fortunate by people that love and care for us. But that is the challenge, you know, a huge part of the challenge of life. And this is something I tried to concentrate on in this last chapter, is how do you bear the suffering that is at the crux of life without becoming tempted and embittered? That's really, really difficult. Now, you know, someone might point out, go ahead and be bitter, see where that gets you. And if you have any sense, and generally people have at least some, they know that being sick and bitter is worse than just being sick. And that being, right, it's worse, but it's very hard temptation to avoid. Sometimes you want to be bitter just out of spite, in some sense, because things are so terrible, all you've got left is your willingness to shake your fist, you know, and say, well, you know, really? Is this like this many poisonous snakes? Really? That's like, maybe I could have learned with just 1 or 2, not 100. And so, but we're all stuck with that. And I think we're stuck with it at every level of our life, in some sense, is how do we maintain a high order moral orientation in spite of suffering and malevolence?
Yeah, when I was a young seminarian, one of the things that I struggled with, I worked in a neonatal intensive care. In this summer, I baptized over 20 babies, and all the babies died. And it was very, I was a seminarian, I was supposed to have all the answers, right? And they'd come to me and they'd say, you know, tell me real quick,